Judge Judy didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She didn't interrupt. She simply looked at the landlord standing across from her, the kind of look that meant the decision was already made, even if he didn't know it yet. This landlord believed he could throw a single mother and her 2 children out of their home without warning. No paperwork. No court order. No second chance. He changed the locks, blocked her access to her own belongings, and told her to figure it out. In his mind it was simple. His property. His rules. End of story. What he didn't realize was that he had just walked into the one courtroom in America where power doesn't protect you, and where ignorance of the law doesn't save you. By the time Judge Judy was done, this man wouldn't just lose the case. He would lose money, credibility, and something far more valuable, the illusion that he was untouchable. The injustice was almost unbelievable. No written eviction notice. No legal warning. Just a mother standing outside her own locked apartment, her children asking why they couldn't go inside, while their backpacks, documents, and medication sat trapped behind a door she was no longer allowed to open. All because one landlord decided the law didn't apply to him. And as Judge Judy listened, silently flipping through the case file, the landlord stood confidently, almost smug, unaware that every excuse he planned to use was already collapsing under the weight of evidence he hadn't bothered to ask about. If you believe that nobody, especially a single mother doing everything she can to survive, should ever be treated like this in America, stay with this story. And honestly, just tap like right now, because what you're about to hear isn't just satisfying, it matters. Because what Judge Judy uncovered next didn't just prove this eviction was illegal. It exposed a pattern. And when that evidence came out, the entire courtroom went silent. The eviction didn't happen in a courtroom. It didn't happen with paperwork, a judge's order, or even a warning taped to a door. It happened early in the morning when the day was still quiet and most people were just waking up. That's when she realized something was wrong. She walked up to the apartment she had lived in for years, reached for her keys, and felt that sickening moment of confusion when the lock didn't turn. She tried again. Then again. That's when she noticed the lock had been changed. No notice. No phone call. No letter. Just a locked door and the sudden understanding that her home was gone. Inside that apartment were her children's backpacks, still packed from the night before. Their birth certificates. School records. Medication that one of her kids needed daily. Clothes. Family photos. Everything that made their life stable was sitting just a few feet away, sealed off behind a door she was no longer allowed to open. In the United States, housing law is clear about one thing. Landlords do not get to take the law into their own hands. In most states, written notice is required before an eviction can even begin. Changing locks without a court order, known as a self-help eviction, isn't just unethical. It's illegal. The law exists for a reason, to prevent exactly this kind of abuse of power. But none of that mattered to the landlord. When the single mother finally reached him, her voice shaking as she explained the situation, his response was cold, dismissive, almost bored. He didn't ask about the children. He didn't care about what was locked inside. He didn't acknowledge that he had skipped every legal step required of him. Instead, he told her something she would never forget. Not my problem. Those 3 words landed harder than the locked door itself. She begged him. Not dramatically. Not hysterically. Just a mother trying to stay calm while her world fell apart. She asked for temporary access, just long enough to grab her children's belongings. She explained that she hadn't refused to pay rent. She had been late. She had communicated. She had asked for time. She had done what tenants are told to do when life hits hard. The landlord didn't care. From his perspective, she was already categorized. Another problem tenant. Another inconvenience. Another person he could discard without consequence. And standing there in the morning air, her kids beside her, she realized something terrifying. He truly believed he could get away with it. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion about the law. This was a decision. And the emotional damage came fast. Her children didn't understand why they couldn't go inside. Why their toys were gone. Why their beds were suddenly off limits. Questions came faster than answers. Fear settled in where security used to live. And all the while, the landlord stayed unreachable, protected by the confidence of someone who had done this before. That's the part that made people angry when this case eventually reached the courtroom. Not just that he changed the locks, but how easily he did it. How casually. As if uprooting a family was no more complicated than replacing a doorknob. Because viewers know this truth instinctively, laws exist to protect people without power. And when someone ignores those laws, it's never an accident, it's entitlement. By the time the single mother found temporary help and figured out where her kids would sleep that night, the damage was already done. Stability had been ripped away in a single morning. And all because one man decided that his authority mattered more than the law. As this story began spreading, something else became clear. The audience didn't need to hear the landlord speak to judge him. His actions had already told the entire story. The cruelty, the disregard, the confidence that no one would stop him. And that's why, before Judge Judy ever said a word, before the case was even officially heard, people watching already knew exactly who they were rooting against. But what made this even worse was who this landlord really was. Before she ever stood in Judge Judy's courtroom, before the landlord ever opened his mouth, there was a life behind this case that mattered far more than legal arguments or property lines. She was an American single mother in her early 30s. Not a stereotype. Not a headline. Just a woman doing everything she could to hold her family together after her marriage collapsed. The separation hadn't been dramatic or public. It was quiet. Painful. The kind that leaves you with more responsibility and fewer resources overnight. She worked full-time. Sometimes more than full-time. One job during the day, another in the evenings when she could manage childcare. Some weeks were manageable. Others were barely survivable. But she showed up. Every single day. Because in her mind, quitting was never an option when 2 kids were depending on her. Her children were school-age. Old enough to understand when something felt wrong. Young enough to still believe their mother could fix anything. Stability mattered to her more than anything else. Same apartment. Same school. Same routine. She wasn't chasing luxury. She was protecting normalcy. The kind of normal that lets kids sleep through the night and focus on spelling tests instead of survival. That's why she followed the rules. When money got tight one month, not absent, just short, she didn't disappear. She didn't ignore calls. She didn't hide. She paid most of the rent and immediately reached out to the landlord. She explained the situation clearly and respectfully. No excuses. No attitude. Just honesty. She asked for a short extension. Days, not weeks. Time she had already planned to cover with her next paycheck. And here's the part that matters. The landlord responded. Not angrily. Not with threats. He acknowledged her message. He knew exactly what was happening. There was communication. Proof. A paper trail that showed she wasn't reckless, she was responsible. In other words, she did exactly what tenants are told to do when life doesn't go as planned. But responsibility doesn't protect you from cruelty when someone decides not to care. What hurt her most wasn't even the lock change. It was the sudden realization that none of her effort mattered to him. All those messages. All that transparency. All that trust she believed existed between landlord and tenant, gone in an instant. Her kids felt it immediately. They asked questions she didn't know how to answer. Why couldn't they go home? Why were their clothes still inside? Why did everything feel broken all of a sudden? And standing there, holding it together for their sake, she felt the weight that single parents carry silently every day, the pressure to be strong even when you're scared. This is the part that locked viewers in emotionally when the story unfolded. Because in America, people believe in a few basic values. That hard work should count for something. That fairness matters. That second chances aren't a weakness, they're a necessity. And watching someone who embodied those values get punished for them felt deeply wrong. She wasn't asking for free rent. She wasn't refusing responsibility. She wasn't trying to game the system. She was asking for time. A little grace. The same understanding that most people hoped they'd receive if their life suddenly shifted. And yet, she was treated like a liability instead of a human being. By the time she stood in Judge Judy's courtroom, she wasn't angry. She wasn't dramatic. She was tired. Tired in the way that only comes from carrying too much for too long without dropping it. Her voice stayed calm. Her answers were direct. And when she spoke about her children, she didn't exaggerate. She didn't need to. The truth was heavy enough. This wasn't a story about missed rent. It was about power. About who gets protection and who gets discarded when rules are ignored. And the audience could feel it. Because almost everyone knows someone like her, or has been her, at some point in their life. That's why the courtroom felt different that day. The sympathy wasn't forced. It was earned. And just when it seemed like the facts were already damning enough, the landlord opened his mouth. What he said next would instantly turn the courtroom against him. The landlord walked into the courtroom like someone who believed the outcome was already decided in his favor. His posture was relaxed. His expression calm, almost dismissive. This wasn't nerves. This was confidence, the kind that comes from someone who's never been told no in situations like this. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't hesitate. "It's my property," he said plainly. "My rules." There was no hesitation in his voice. No uncertainty. He spoke as if that single sentence ended the discussion. As if ownership alone gave him authority over people's lives, not just buildings. He went on to explain that the tenant had been late on rent. Not unpaid, just late, but in his mind that detail didn't matter. He framed it as a failure. A violation. A reason enough to act immediately. "She was late," he repeated as if saying it twice made it stronger. What he didn't mention, and what Judge Judy was already well aware of, was that being late does not give a landlord the right to bypass the law. But he spoke with the confidence of someone who assumed no one would challenge him. As the conversation continued, his tone hardened. When Judge Judy asked about the children, his response shifted the atmosphere in the room. "That's not my responsibility," he said. "I'm running a business, not a charity." There it was. That single moment changed everything. The courtroom didn't react loudly. There were no gasps. Just a subtle, collective pause. The kind that happens when people realize they're listening to someone who doesn't see others as human beings, just liabilities. Judge Judy raised her eyes. He didn't notice. Instead, he continued explaining himself, growing more animated as he spoke. He talked over the tenant. He talked over the facts. And eventually he talked over the judge. Each time Judge Judy tried to clarify a point, he interrupted. Each time she asked a direct question, he answered with an argument instead of an answer. It wasn't nervousness. It was entitlement. He truly believed his perspective mattered more than the process. When Judge Judy reminded him to let her finish, he nodded, and then interrupted again moments later. That was when she gave him his first warning. "Sir," she said calmly, "you're not going to interrupt me." Her tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Anyone familiar with her courtroom knew what that warning meant. This was the moment most people course-correct. He didn't. Instead, he leaned into his defense even harder. "I've been doing this for years," he said. "I know how this works." That sentence landed with quiet arrogance. Not experience, superiority. As if longevity excused behavior. As if repetition turned illegal actions into accepted practice. Judge Judy asked him directly whether he had followed the legal eviction process. He avoided the question. He talked about late payments again. About tenants taking advantage of landlords. About how the system favors renters. Each word made it clearer that he didn't just misunderstand the law, he resented it. And with every excuse, the audience's anger sharpened. Because viewers weren't hearing a man defending a mistake. They were hearing someone justify cruelty. Someone who believed power erased responsibility. Someone who thought his experience placed him above accountability. When Judge Judy tried to bring the conversation back to specifics, he interrupted yet again. She stopped him. This time her tone shifted, not angry but precise. "You're not listening," she said. "And that's going to be a problem." He smiled. Slightly. The kind of smile people give when they think they're still winning. That smile didn't last long. Because that was the moment Judge Judy leaned forward and asked him for something very simple. One document. One piece of paper that would either support his story, or destroy it completely. And as the words left her mouth, the energy in the courtroom changed. Because that's when Judge Judy asked for one document. And everything changed. Judge Judy didn't rush the moment. She didn't raise her voice or repeat herself. She simply looked down at the file in front of her, then back up at the landlord, and asked a question so basic it should have ended the case instantly. "Where is the written eviction notice?" The courtroom went quiet. For the first time since he'd started talking, the landlord hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but enough. He shifted his weight. Cleared his throat. His confidence didn't disappear, but it cracked. "There isn't one," he said. "I gave her verbal notice." Judge Judy didn't react. She didn't nod. She didn't interrupt. She let the answer hang in the air long enough for everyone to understand exactly what it meant. "So," she said calmly, "you changed the locks without a written notice and without a court order." The landlord shrugged. "Verbal notice is enough," he replied. She should have known better. That was the moment his case stopped being weak and became indefensible. Judge Judy asked him if he was aware that written notice is required under the law. He waved the question away, dismissive. "I've done this for years," he said again. "Tenants always say they didn't get notice. That's how it goes." And then he made the mistake that sealed his fate. He turned slightly toward the single mother, gestured vaguely in her direction, and said, "Single moms like to play the victim when things don't go their way." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed. The courtroom froze. Not dramatically but completely. Even the landlord seemed unaware of what he'd just done, still riding the momentum of his own arrogance. He thought he was explaining himself. What he was actually doing was exposing himself. Judge Judy looked up slowly. Her expression didn't show anger. It showed focus. That calm, dangerous stillness settled in, the kind that signals something irreversible is about to happen. "Excuse me," she said. The landlord tried to recover. He smiled awkwardly as if to soften the blow. "I'm just saying," he continued, "they use their kids to get sympathy. That's not my problem. Business is business." That was it. The air in the room felt heavy, like pressure building before a storm. Judge Judy closed the file in front of her and leaned back slightly in her chair. Her voice, when she spoke again, was quieter than before. "You don't get to decide who deserves sympathy," she said. "And you don't get to ignore the law because it's inconvenient." The landlord opened his mouth to respond. She stopped him with one raised hand. "No," she said. "You've spoken enough. This was the moment. The pivot. The point of no return. And if you love watching powerful people finally face consequences, the kind who think experience makes them untouchable, this is exactly the moment to hit subscribe. Because what comes next is the reason this courtroom exists." Judge Judy began explaining the law. Slowly. Clearly. Without emotion. She explained that verbal notice is meaningless under the statute. That changing locks without a court order is illegal. That removing access to a tenant's belongings is a violation. That involving children doesn't create an exception, it increases responsibility. With every sentence, the landlord's posture changed. The confidence drained. The interruptions stopped. The smirk vanished. He tried to speak again. She shut him down. "You don't get to talk over the law," she said. "And you don't get to lecture this court about business." Silence returned, heavier this time. The single mother sat perfectly still. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just listened. Because for the first time since that morning her locks were changed, someone with authority was saying out loud what she had known all along. That she wasn't wrong. That she wasn't irresponsible. That she wasn't powerless. Judge Judy looked directly at the landlord. "You thought this was about rent," she said. "It's not. This is about control. And you abused it." The landlord swallowed hard. He finally understood. And everyone in that courtroom could feel it, the shift, the weight, the certainty. Punishment wasn't just coming. It was inevitable. Judge Judy didn't argue with the landlord. She didn't debate him. She didn't need to. Instead, she did what she always does when someone believes confidence can replace compliance with the law. She educated him. Slowly. Clearly. One piece at a time. She explained that in the United States, a landlord cannot remove a tenant without following a specific legal process. That process includes written notice. It includes time. It includes court involvement. And without those things, any attempt to force a tenant out, especially by changing locks, is considered an illegal lockout. Self-help evictions are prohibited, she said, because landlords are not judges. The landlord shifted in his seat. Judge Judy continued. She explained that tenant rights exist not to punish landlords, but to prevent abuse. To stop exactly what happened here. A family being pushed out overnight without warning, without protection, and without recourse. Then she moved to the evidence. She held up printed text messages. Messages the landlord had clearly forgotten existed. Messages where the single mother explained her situation. Messages where she confirmed partial payment. Messages where she asked, politely, for a short extension. And messages where the landlord acknowledged receiving them. "You knew she was trying to pay," Judge Judy said. You knew she hadn't disappeared. You knew she wasn't refusing responsibility. The landlord opened his mouth. She cut him off. Don't interrupt me, she said calmly. I'm not finished. Next came the payment receipts. Proof that most of the rent had been paid. Not disputed. Not delayed beyond acknowledgement. But documented. Time-stamped. Judge Judy laid them out like pieces of a puzzle, each one fitting perfectly into a picture the landlord had tried to deny. Then she turned to the photos. Clear images of the apartment door. New locks. No notice posted. No court order. No paperwork. Just a physical barrier that turned a home into a no-entry zone overnight. These photographs were taken the morning you changed the locks, she said. Before any court involvement. Before any lawful eviction. The landlord's voice cracked for the first time. I didn't think. She stopped him again. You didn't think the law applied to you, she said. That's when she went further. She revealed that this wasn't an isolated incident. There were prior complaints. Not lawsuits, complaints. Tenants who didn't have the resources or time to fight back, but whose names were on record. Patterns of behavior that looked uncomfortably familiar. Late rent followed by sudden lock changes. Verbal warnings instead of written ones. Pressure instead of process. You've done this before, Judge Judy said. Haven't you? The landlord swallowed. I wouldn't say. Yes, she said. You have. His shoulders dropped. The confidence that once filled the room was gone, replaced by something closer to fear. He tried to explain. Tried to reframe. Tried to claim misunderstanding. I was just trying to protect my property, he said weakly. Judge Judy didn't raise her voice. You don't protect property by breaking the law, she replied. You protect property by following it. The dismantling was complete, not through anger but through precision. Every excuse met with a statute. Every justification met with evidence. Every attempt to backtrack met with documentation. The landlord's tone changed completely. Gone was the smugness. Gone were the interruptions. He spoke softly now, carefully, like someone suddenly aware that every word mattered. I didn't mean to cause harm, he said. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. Intent doesn't erase impact, she said. And ignorance doesn't erase responsibility. The single mother sat quietly, listening as the truth unfolded in real time. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react. She didn't need to. The facts were speaking for her now. Judge Judy summarized the case calmly. Illegal lockout. No written notice. Tenant rights violated. Children affected. Pattern of misconduct. This is not a close call, she said. The landlord looked down at the table in front of him. His hands were clasped tightly together. The illusion that he could talk his way out of this was gone. Judge Judy paused. And when she looked up again, everyone knew the next words would change everything. Judge Judy didn't hesitate. This is an illegal eviction, she said plainly. And the law is very clear about the consequences. She explained the ruling slowly, deliberately, so there would be no confusion. The landlord would be required to pay maximum damages allowed under the statute. Not a symbolic amount. Not a warning. Real money, enough to send a message that abusing power comes with a price. He would also be responsible for hotel and relocation costs. Every night the family was forced to stay somewhere else because he decided to change the locks, he would pay for it. Not because he felt bad. Because the law demanded it. Next, Judge Judy ordered the immediate return of the tenant's belongings. Not when convenient. Not after arrangements. Immediately. Everything locked inside that apartment, documents, clothing, school supplies, medication, was to be made accessible without delay. Then came the warning. Judge Judy looked directly at the landlord. If you ever do this again, she said, you will be facing consequences far beyond this courtroom. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. She explained that illegal evictions don't just expose landlords to civil liability, they open the door to further legal action. Complaints. Investigations. Penalties that escalate quickly when patterns of abuse are identified. You don't get to experiment with people's lives, she said. And you don't get to hide behind ownership to justify cruelty. Her final words weren't about rent, or contracts, or paperwork. They were about power. Power without responsibility is abuse, Judge Judy said. And when children are involved, that responsibility increases. It doesn't disappear. The landlord didn't respond. He couldn't. The case was over. The single mother sat quietly as the ruling was read. No celebration. No tears. Just relief. The kind that settles slowly, after days of fear finally loosened their grip. In the weeks that followed, her life began to stabilize. The hotel stay gave her breathing room. Time to regroup. Time to plan. Time to get her children back into a routine that felt safe again. Her belongings were returned. Her documents recovered. The small things that had felt impossibly far away suddenly came back within reach. Her kids returned to school. Backpacks on their shoulders. Lunches packed. Questions replaced by answers. Fear replaced by structure. And for the first time since that morning the locks were changed, they slept knowing where they would wake up. The landlord, on the other hand, faced consequences that didn't end with the ruling. Word spread. Complaints resurfaced. His name followed him in ways it never had before. The confidence he walked into that courtroom with was gone, replaced by a new understanding that experience does not protect you from accountability. Because in America, the law doesn't exist to favor the powerful. It exists to protect people when power is abused. And that's why this case resonated so deeply. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it was loud. But because it was right. If you believe justice should protect the vulnerable, not the powerful, subscribe and share this story. Because stories like this remind us what the law is supposed to do.